Welcome to this morning's session of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. This is our very first session of the committee's inquiry into British film and high-end TV, as we look at how we can build on the success of the industry, but also considering what more we can do to tackle some of the challenges that it faces, whether that's reliance on things like overseas investment, which was highlighted by last year's US strikes, the challenges of funding and showing independent film, the uncertain risks and opportunities of AI, which is haunting some people. So we launched this inquiry last summer, and that's 20 years since our predecessor Culture, Media and Sport Committee did an inquiry into the British film industry. And so there is no better place to start than by hearing this morning from director, writer and producer Gurinder Chadha, who gave evidence to that committee back in 2003. She hasn't changed a bit, but she was at that stage was hot on the heels of the success of Bend It Like Beckham, of course, and has since then had many more successes. Now working with Disney, we hear, on a forthcoming film.
Yes.
So welcome back.
Thank you,
Gurinder. It's great to see you. You gave evidence to our predecessor committee back in 2003. What have been the most significant changes that you've experienced in making films over those last 2 decades?
Wow. I think one of the hardest things is just surviving. A lot of my colleagues have, not survived as independent filmmakers, and often when I do meet people who I've known back in the day, they do come up to me and go, God, how do you do it? Like, how come you're still making a living from making films? And that saddens me, because there's some very good filmmakers that started the same time as me who no longer are, can't afford it, basically, to live. So that also is to say that, for me as a very distinct independent British filmmaker, I often get very upset when I'm trying to set up films, because I think people should be running to me and saying, oh, you've made so much money, you've made millions for so many people, we should be giving you money, to make films. But right now I'm putting together an independent Christmas film set in London, very diverse, and it's been a real struggle for me to get that film off the ground, partly because the lead character is Indian. And I've always had that with the films I've made, and people have always said, oh, the girl playing football, can she be Mexican, or can she be this, or can she, but I've always stuck with my guns, and I think it's just sad for me now that I still have to, I get rejections from people who you'd think should know better, and the pattern I always have is, oh, we don't know if it's going to be commercial because it's got the race element and it is very English. Will it travel? It's British. And then, of course, I go on and I make the films, and then people always go, oh, actually, it does work. I had a similar experience with Blinded by the Light, my last film that I made in Luton with the music of Bruce Springsteen. And it was very specific, culturally specific to Luton and the experience of a British Pakistani writer, Safraz Manzoor, in 80s Britain. But the link for me was the words and music of Bruce Springsteen that he was writing in New Jersey in the 70s, completely were relatable to this kid in Luton. And I thought that was a great British film. And again, it should have been easier making that film, but I made it. And then it went on and opened at Sundance Film Festival, and I made it for £6.5 million, and it sold for $17 million in a bidding war at Sundance. So there's a gap somewhere for me between people not thinking independent British film is lucrative, is commercial, and can be a great industry. So I think I'm here today as an independent British filmmaker. Mm-hmm. I have had opportunities to make studio fare in the past. I have turned down those opportunities in favour of doing things that are more British because they speak to me. Little things that are important to share with you that I'm not sure other people will share is I travel to a lot of countries in the world, And every country I go to, there will always be someone who smiles at me at a shopping mall, or comes up to me in a restaurant, or, you know, goes on about a film that I've made. Normally it's Bend It, but it's also Angus Thongs, and often it's Pride and Prejudice. And even yesterday, walking down Regent Street for the sales, people were sort of smiling at me like this as I was walking. So that sense of appreciation, I mentioned that because film is emotional and film touches people, and it tells us who we are as a nation. So independent film is a very important voice. It's our passport to the rest of the world. And whilst we have tremendous successes, you know, with Willy Wonka and, you know, the Paddington movies and big commercial films that are shot here in Britain, those are effectively studio movies. And whilst I'm very proud of all the talent that's gone into making them, you know, in terms of cast and crew, and of course David is an amazing producer who's looking big, in doing big. We need those films, but we also can't stifle the, you know, independent talent that tells us what's going on in Ireland, for example, or Wales, or Scotland, or Liverpool, or Hull, or what, you know, these are the films that tell us who we are.
How does that interdependence between independent film and studio-backed film work? So A Little Bird tells us that you're potentially working on something with Disney at the moment.
Yes.
How does that work
Well,
out?
Disney came to me. Disney approached me a year ago, the head of Disney, and said, you know, it's time for us to look at making an Indian princess film, and you're the person to do it. And that's because obviously I made Bend It and Bride and Prejudice and these films, independent British films, which gave them comfort that I was the right person to do it. You know, I mean, they could have easily have got an American person who has done loads of Disney films, and, you know, but pat on the back to them that they actually came and sought culturally the right person, you know. So I've been working on the script with them, but at the same time I'm still working on independent British films because that's also where my heart is. And in fact, The Disney Princess is actually quite a British film about a princess who's Indian, but it will become a very Disney branded film, and I'm very excited about that process of taking my British independent film knowledge and turning it into a film that will always be like a Disney princess film, but always have that kind of British sensibility at heart. And I think that the thing about Britain is incredibly diverse, culturally and artistically and creatively, because of its history. You know, there is a 400-year relationship with Britain and India, which is why I'm sitting here. You know, but I'm able to traverse the international audiences because I come from a country that's had international relationships for hundreds of years, and that's a very important point to make. So in independent film, you know, we've, you know, obviously I grew up in the 70s and 80s and went through a certain cultural situation, whereas my kids, who are 16 now, you know, they don't tolerate any kind of racism or prejudice or whatever, you know, and actually they have active interventions at school and go up to people and say, you can't say that, that's not allowed, you know. So when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about kids who are growing up not knowing what people like me went through, and actually seeing the world as this incredibly diverse country. And those are the filmmakers that I need to encourage, and I want to encourage, and whose work I want to see. So it's very nice when young filmmakers write to me and go, oh, you're the legend, you started it on, you know, you started us off. But I'm like, yeah, but what are you doing? How are you getting on with things? And I do try and mentor people, and I do try and sort of give people advice, but I find myself still saying, you know, you've got to compromise to get it made. You've got to do certain things, you know, to get them distributed. And the gap that you talk about is, it really comes down to casting at the moment. So whatever film you've made, you generally need a star or a star name in the cast. in order for financiers to feel comfortable that your film will be seen and be distributed. And now I happily have made a lot of films without stars, and in fact I've created stars.
Yes, you have.
So, and that's because I've gone out on a limb and looked at British talent. You know, Kira was one of 40 girls that came in that day when I was auditioning, and she came in and she sat down and she was terribly natural, and she just said, I don't know what you've been doing, but you've been in my kitchen because you've written exactly what I say to my mum all the time, sort of thing. So, like, she was very authentic for me. And then the same with Aaron Taylor-Johnson. He was 16, and this kid was in complete control of his performance as and character in this one audition. And even though the studio at the time, it was Paramount, wanted another actor who actually had a bit of a name, I pushed for Aaron because I just loved this 16-year-old kid, and I thought, wow, he's really got something special and he's got a command of his art. So I took a chance on him in a studio film, unknown actor, who now could be playing Bond, you know. And so it all starts here. Independent filmmaking is where it starts. And of course, a lot of people then go on and make studio films, and that's great. But without that sense of identity of who we are, you know, I'm often quite envious of the French. You know, they have a fantastic film culture, and they have a fantastic sense of who they are culturally in terms of humour, thrillers, everything, because they have such a strong identity because they've maintained that with their language, you know, French-speaking films. But we also have that if we're allowed to, you know, make those films. And I think the government incentives for independent filmmaking are vital. I mean, my Christmas film right now is coming together because of my UK tax credit benefit and my UK distributor. It's a new company, True Brit.
We're going to come on to the finances in a second.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave some questions.
Sorry,
for
I've
my
gone.
rest of the panel. Fabulous, we love it. Thank you. Giles, you had a quick one, didn't
Yes,
you?
a very quick one. Gurinder, it's great to have you here, and what a great champion you are for the industry.
Thank you.
Just you mentioned just now that you had a lot of kickback in the early days, and still do, from people who say it's never going to work, you haven't got a star, it's an Indian, can they bend it like Beckham, all of that thing. Does that come back from? Is that from distributors, producers, finance people? Where does that kickback come from? I mean, you have to be very determined to crash down those walls.
Yeah, I think it's an industry-wide thing because this is a business. We are an industry. It is a business. Everyone's looking to mitigate their losses, right? And so having a name gives comfort factor to distributors. You know, having a name gives comfort factor to exhibitors, obviously, you know, and also cast often, you know, want to work with other people who they might know, you know, as opposed to unknowns. And so it is very hard. If I was starting today, I don't know if I'd have been able to get Bargee on the Beach off the ground, to be honest with you. In today's climate, I don't know if people would take a chance on me. I only got a break. My break, two things happened. One was the British Film Institute had a new scheme at the time called New Directors, where they were offering a £20,000 grant to people who had something to say and hadn't been to film school, but had something to say and wanted to make a film. And I wanted to make a pop promo about a very important Bhangra band that had just emerged, and I was like all about Bhangra, and because to me it was British and Indian, and it was the first expression of something that represented me as opposed to what my parents were. And so my friend Kate Webb said, why don't you apply to the BFI? She's a big film person. And I said, I can't make a film. I haven't been to film school. And she said, people who go to film school don't know what they're doing. You know, you've got an idea, apply. So she helped me apply. And then I made my first film, I'm British But, ... which is about identity. I spoke to 4 young British Asians.
You didn't have those kickbacks then?
No, because I had the BFI supporting me and saying, this is great. It's a new voice, and they support. That was a big break. And then after I made that film, which is available on BFI iPlayer, if you're interested.
Shameless.
Shameless. But after I made that film, a woman who ran Film 4 at the time called Karen Bamborough, she saw it, and Karen said, wow, this is a new British voice. I'm going to support this. And she plucked me up, brought me to Film 4, and helped me make Bargee on the Beach.
So just finally, if I may, Chair, the industry hasn't changed much then. It is still a lot of...
It's still who you know.
Who do you know, and chance, and it still is star-obsessed.
Yes.
So if, for instance, I say I've got Tom Cruise, then the movie gets made.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
That's very good. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Alex.
Thank you. It's great to have you here. My children loved Blinded by the Light. It's quite an achievement to get two teenage boys from Yorkshire wanting to go and visit Luton. So it shows the emotional connection that your films have. I mean, you just spoke eloquently about the issues, and when you were last here in 2003 at the predecessor committee, you spoke about the challenge of raising finance for Bend It Like Beckham. Clearly, since then, as you've said, you've progressed in the industry. You're much better known now. But the evidence that we've received is, as you've said, it's got harder for independent producers. You've mentioned film tax relief, and you mentioned that BFI scheme. Do we need to do more? Do we need more schemes? Do we need more support from different parts of the industry and from government? What do you think we need to do to ensure there is the right environment for independent producers?
I think a tiered tax incentive is great. So if you're an independent film under a certain budget, you get a greater tax credit than perhaps the more studio-backed films. I think a tiered credit system is very good. I think something that encourages first-time filmmakers is really good as well. So, producers are incentivized to develop talent. I go back to a time when UGC owned a lot of our cinemas, a French company, and they had a policy where in all their screens, one screen would always be for independent British films. And I thought that was an amazing thing, because it was literally from, egg to omelette. It was like people needed British films to show in the cinema, because here was a cinema chain that had set aside, a screen for them. And that really plays into the idea of industry. It's an industry. So then that incentivizes people to make films that are cinematic, because it's going to be on in the cinema. And those theatres have to book those screens. So they need the content. So I would absolutely bring exhibition into this and distribution into this by saying, earmark in our cinemas space for British independent films. And also then it means that when people who do love still going to the cinema, right, you have a curated place. So every Friday night you're like, oh, let's go and see the British film. So you might not know what it is, it might not be your genre or whatever, but it's like, every Friday there's going to be a new British film and you're going to go and support that. And so you start that culture. That's what I would do.
Well, we'll quote that to Phil Clapp in the next session. So
I already told him about that outside.
He's writing furiously.
The other thing that you mentioned was that you people, colleagues have dropped out over the years that you've been doing this.
Yeah.
You've gone to do other things. In the period since you started, imagine when you did Bend It Like Beckham, you went to cinema, you went to DVD. Now we have this scenario where some films are on streaming on TV at the same time they go to the cinemas. How has streaming changed the role of producers and raising finance? Has it made it easier or harder?
I think on the whole, streaming's been a good thing, both for us and consumers, because they need content, and Netflix. I've got a film with Netflix myself right now, quite a big film, and I think that they are, that they're a great place for people to go to for independent film, because they have the finance, and they have the exhibition, and they need content. I think what scuppers you, though, is you're back to that same thing of who's your star, who's the name, so that when people are scrolling through what to watch, they need the name to go, oh, it's a new film by, you know. And I find that quite disheartening still, you know. One of the things that I came a cropper when I was trying to make my film, I've been trying to make it for about 3 years, was that Apple had a similar themed film with 2 big stars, and everyone kept saying, oh no, you know, they're already making that film and it's with Will Ferrell, you know, and Ryan Reynolds, and so your film hasn't got a hope in hell. And I'm like, but that's such a different film, and mine's very different. And in the end, that film came and went, and not very many people saw it. And it wasn't, you know, as it could have been much better. And so I had to wait for that to pass, and then people are like, oh yeah, that didn't do well, you know. And but I was still. But because that film didn't do well with 2 stars, there's this perception that, oh, mine might not do as well, you know. So the industry is still regulated, I think, by those big stars and by those tentpole films. And I think what we need is the sense of our own British culture. And I'm old enough to remember when Film 4 started. And David Rose was the first commissioning editor at Film 4. And here was an opportunity for a broadcaster to create something that was, you know, going to be British cinema. Prior to that, we had Ken Loach and Mike Leigh, probably, you know, who was sort of, you know, putting out films. But when David Rose came along and Film 4 came along, there was this kind of burst of the possibility of what British cinema could be. And we had amazing films like Letter to Brezhnev and all these films set in the north and the south, and My Beautiful Laundrette was another one, you know, that all came out of that visionary space where David Rose said, I'm going to create a British cinema industry, you know, culturally, creatively, and gave money to that. That's what I long for, is that sense of vision where people say, here we are, this is the British industry, and these are the kind of films we make. And they might not all have stars, but they're really good because they're relating to us. They're about what's going on in our culture. They're about what's going on around us. And, oh, this actor's broken out. They're a star now. They're this, they're that. So it's about nurturing the talent and assisting in creating our culture, not just being at the mercy of finance.
I'll just make one brief question. So you just spoke about making films in the north. I'm an MP in Leeds. Channel 4's moved to Leeds. It's changed our dynamic in Leeds around production.
Yeah.
Bargee on the Beach, obviously a Blackpool film, but I imagine you didn't do your post-production in the north of England. So it's a big issue that we've got. There's a lack of post-production facilities in the north, although there is a lot of production. How do you think we can address the issue of post-production being more spread through the UK so there are less regional differentials, and ensuring the whole of the film industry in the UK isn't, or parts of it aren't gravitated towards London, which is what's happening at the moment?
Well, I think that, again, it's an industry, so people are going to go to, so, for example, if your production is based in a studio, like Pinewood or Ealing or Twickenham, your production base will be around there, and therefore your post will be around there. So one of the ways is to create studios in the north, you know, and start bringing the industry there. And that's what happened in Northern Ireland with Game of Thrones. I mean, the way the industry just went in Northern Ireland from that one show was incredible. So one could do that. And I think that's a great thing because, for example, Liverpool, you know, people use Liverpool a lot for New York, you know, of a certain period. And we have tremendous landscapes across Britain that could double for all kinds of countries. A lot of people go to Prague to shoot England because it's cheaper, you know, and the studios are cheaper and the workforce is cheaper than doing it in England. So part of that issue, I think, is that the studios, do pay top dollar for studio space. So that's another problem for independent filmmaking, is not being able to get that studio space because it's all been bought out by, lots of episodes of Star Wars, spin-offs, So having our own studios dotted around the country, I think, is a great thing, and people will come to those studios and develop artists and creatives in those areas if those studios are set up. I mean, I myself I'm not going into a studio space right now with my film. I'm actually using an old disused school in North London that actually is owned by the temple in Neasden. They bought an old disused school across the road, and it actually works amazingly, and other films have used it too, but it's much cheaper for my budget, and it gives me, it's got massive outdoor space where I can build a great outdoor set. So when you're working to a budget as an independent filmmaker, you're always looking at how to make your money go further. So if you are offering me a financial incentive to go to Leeds, which halves my budget, I'll go to Leeds.
Keep that in mind.
Thank
Leeds
you.
doubles for Moscow, so if you're doing anything in Moscow, come to Leeds. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good morning and
John.
welcome.
I retweeted your tweet this morning.
Good. You've come up with a number of memorable lines so far. You began rather bleakly saying, and I quote, "One of the hardest things is just surviving," which is quite chilling. But then you went on to talk about how hard it was to get investment if you had an Indian lead character. Talk us through that. Why?
So in terms of the bleak thing, let me just say one thing. I was quite an impoverished filmmaker. And then I made a film about an Indian girl in football, and everything went, and I suddenly had money. And I did the good Indian thing. I bought a property. I bought a lovely flat in Soho. And
so did Keira Knightley. She bought a house 3 doors down from me, funny enough.
Did she?
So I see the crowds. I see the crowds outside our house whenever she emerges for a premiere or anything.
Oh, bless. But that flat has been amazing for me because I've been able to have a rental income that allows me to not have to worry about a mortgage. Other people haven't got that. That's why I've got a safety net. It's that simple. I have that safety net, not worrying about a mortgage because I have a rental income from that flat. So we need, that's one reason why I've been able to survive as an independent filmmaker. In terms of the Indian thing, it's still, I don't know. I mean, we're not commercial, are we? Unless we've got Dev Patel in it, it's not commercial.
Let's be blunt. Is it just naked racism?
I think it's, yes, this perception that people won't want to see a film that is culturally, doesn't reflect them. Basically, that's what I think it always comes down to, which is why I always push for it. Which is why I always push for that, because I always have to prove that what I'm doing. I'm always trying to push what is British and British culture.
I know that's what you're pushing.
Yeah.
But why are people pushing against you?
Because
if you
because
say I've got a track record of finding young stars. I've shown I can do it. This is a young Indian star. Why are people saying, well, I believe you when it comes to the white stars, but I don't believe you when it comes to the Indian star? That must be racism.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it'll be much easier if you have a white cast, actually, than a cast of colour to make films. You can talk to any person of colour filmmaker and they will tell you that.
Is that just Indian or does it...
No, black as well. Why aren't there? Why has there not been another...
All the fabulous young black English stars that are around.
Yes, absolutely. But how much homegrown black independent films do you see? There's a few, definitely. Don't get me wrong. There's been a lot of recently, and I think with the BFI support, definitely.
Is it harder for Indians, Asians in general, than any other minority group?
We don't have the stars in the same way. I mean, Idris, if you get Idris Elba, you're done.
Idris
you
Elba,
know, and John Boyega, great. But these are all, people who've worked really hard to be where they are, and there's only a number of films that they can do. But if I was to get cast, a new kid out of film school and try and make a film with them as the lead, it will be hard. Yes.
An Indian kid, but not hard or not as hard with a white kid.
Yeah.
It's very disturbing, isn't it?
Yep. I can only talk about my experience. That's been my experience on the film I'm making right now.
Now, of course, everybody's seen Bend It Like Beckham, or Bend It, as we now discover, you call it. And I've read that it
Journalist in India that calls me Bend It Queen. Which is quite funny.
There you are. The film I've read has been inspirational for generations of young women soccer players,
yes.
cited by Scottish, American, English soccer players, and of course it had a big impact. But talking about indie films, I mean, some of the indie films made in Scotland, for example, like Trainspotting, had a huge impact in the 90s. But the new generation of films made in Scotland, I hope I'm not being unfair, but Outlaw King, for example, and Trainspotting 2 had much less impact, both at home and abroad, didn't they? Can you tell us, as people are learning about this mostly from a standing start, why did this new generation, why do they have less impact when they're released?
Well, I think that there are still films being made that do have impact. The thing is with film, not every film is going to be a hit. I'd made 3 films before Bend It became a big hit. So you need to have the volume. You need to have the volume of films.
Volume or quality? Is it the case that
it's both?
Outlaw King and Trainspotting 2 just weren't as good?
Yes, it could be. There was Gregory's Girl 2 as well. That wasn't as good as the original. And I think that's slightly unfair because generally the statistic is if you finance 10 films on a slate, 1 will be a super duper hit, 2, 3 might be a reasonable hit. Another 2 might be okay, and 4 will be duds, and fall apart. So there is that statistic. So you can't expect every film to be a hit, but if you have the volume of it and you have the culture of it. See, right now, those Scottish filmmakers, they're just probably really glad to get their films off the ground and get them made, and it's a big break because there isn't the volume. If we had the same volume that was going on with David Rose's Running Film, for example, right? He just went Liverpool, Leeds. I can't remember that film in Leeds with Kulvinder Gier and the 2 girls. It's not. Do you remember the one in Leeds with Kulvinder Gier and the 2 girls? Oh, it was very. I can't remember it. Anyway. He just went regional. David Orkin, who took over after Trainspotting. David Orkin did Bargee on the Beach. It was a period where people were just looking at Britain and going, these are great voices. Let's invest in these voices. They've got an interesting take on the world. It sounds interesting. Let's do it. And out of that came great films that weren't looking to go, are we going to be big in New Zealand? Are we going to make it in America? They were just showing the world culturally who they were and what they were.
We probably shouldn't romanticise, because famously Braveheart had difficulty, didn't it, filming because they couldn't get the budgetary breaks, and they had to use, if I remember correctly, Ireland for those fabulous Scottish scenes of brave Celts escaping from the yoke of the English, and an ongoing theme, and they used the Irish Army, didn't they, for those scenes? And people said we've got to give more tax advantages.
Yes.
In terms of tax today, what role do you think tax relief plays?
I think tax relief for someone like me is the cornerstone of why you make a film in Britain, because you know you're guaranteed inward investment to a certain level that you can then build your film around. You know, some places offer 40% tax credit, which is amazing. You know,
Italy.
Yes, Saudi Arabia is really trying to build their film industry. India's just introduced a tax credit as well.
France, 30%.
Yeah.
Ireland, 32%. All those countries are giving bigger tax breaks than the United Kingdom.
Yes.
Well, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? If you feel that you could, as you pointed out, make Budapest or Prague look like a Victorian city in the United Kingdom, and you get bigger tax breaks, well, why wouldn't you go there?
Absolutely. That will. If you gave me a tax credit of 30% for, let's take Blinded by the Light, 6.5 million. If I had a 30% tax credit on that, that's 2 million, just over 2 million, is gone. I already have. Then I have a UK distributor, which I would get another 2 million for a UK film. Push for that. Oh, shit, I'm so sorry.
That's just a big budgetary offer that's coming through now. The third-year plea. They want an all-Indian cast. Listen.
I wish it's actually my 85-year-old uncle from Sydney, Australia, who's got his timings all wrong.
Well, I'm glad he's watching this blockbuster that we're putting on.
So a third is tax credit. A third is a UK sale. So I've only got to look for another third, which I can get by selling a few territories, or I can get a bank loan, or like it's much easier now for me to get that other third. But then here's what happens. I've got my budget, right? I've got my film. I go out and make the film I want to make, right? But also what the UK distributor wants, right? And then I have the whole world to sell. Okay.
Before I hand back to the chair, very quickly.
So then I go to Sundance, launch my film, and then suddenly, you know, it sells for much, much more than I made it for, and everyone's quids in. But the profits are then going back to the British film industry through the tax credit. So, Bend It Like Beckham, the returns that the UK Film Council, Bend It Like Beckham only happened because of the UK tax credit. No other reason. I had been rejected left, right and centre, but the UK Film Council came in after much fighting from me, but that's another story. But I pushed and pushed and pushed. It happened. As soon as I got that 1.1, other people went, oh, okay, and then Red Bus came in.
Listen, we write a report at the end of this, so I was going to conclude by saying, in a nutshell, if you could put a sentence in this report that you'd like us to include for ministers' attention, what would you like us to say?
I would like you to say increase the tax credit, support for independent filmmaking, because it's going to come back to you in droves, and it is a fantastic way to inward invest in the British film industry, because if that film does well and makes profit, it's all coming back to you, as opposed to going to a private equity firm or a bank or somewhere else where you're trying to get that money.
I think we've got a line. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, John.
Excellent.
David.
Thank you. And welcome and good morning. I want to pick up something Alex asked about and explore the sort of difference over the 20 years of your evidence sessions, which is a slightly weird thought, isn't it? I'm sure it is for you as well. You said in 2003, I wanted to be about Bend It. I wanted to be in Britain and make a British movie, but I wanted to make one that was going to play multiplexes. Is that still as big a driver now as it was 20 years ago?
Yes, commercial films. I want to make commercial films. I always intend to make commercial films. The reason I'm making a Christmas film is because I want it to be there every year. You know, and I've not set it up with a streamer. I've done it with a British distributor, because if I sell it to a streamer, I have to sell the whole lot off. But if I do it in the way I've done it, you know, I have the possibility of earning from it every year.
Christmas films, sort of pensions, like Christmas songs,
Yes.
you have one hit.
Yes, so that's the commercial side of me. But I'm still trying to make it diverse. So I'm, it's a Christmas carol. I'm making a Christmas carol, but my Scrooge is an Indian Tory who hates refugees. But then we go on that journey with them, and hopefully they have reclamation.
Excellent thought.
I didn't want to bring party politics into this, but I'm afraid I had to.
Very dangerous in front of a select committee.
I have told Rishi Sunak about it, by the way.
Sitting behind the table. Yeah, quite.
I did tell the Prime Minister about it, and he said, "Oh, don't make me look bad."
Yeah.
And I said, I don't have to do that for you, Rishi. But anyway, the film is fun, and it's British. It's Dickens. It's very close to Dickens's original themes, given our cost of living crisis in Britain. But by making it an Indian Scrooge, it changes everything in terms of how I get it financed. Because suddenly people go, "Oh, it's not commercial, it's small, it's an Indian film."
I mean, I get the commercial point that you don't lose all your IP to the streamers, but you say you make stuff, you make product for the streaming companies as well.
Yes.
Is that just because they're the only people who fund those particular?
Well, someone like me has to have about 5 projects on the go.
Yeah.
Always. That's how we survive, right? We have different projects with different people, and we're constantly pushing. So my Netflix project is a project that came to me via another producer, a big Hollywood producer, in fact, Jeff Kirschenbaum, and he sent me a script that I really liked the premise of it, but it wasn't executed well, and I rewrote it, and then Netflix bought our rewrite. My husband and I, he wrote it with me. Netflix bought our rewrite, and that project is now with Netflix.
But what I'm sort of pondering is whether we're all just being nostalgic about a form of delivery. I mean, I can see from your commercial point of view, you'd rather have, as it were, the movie financing, because it could be a pension for life, as opposed to just handing it all over to the streamer. But there's a separate argument, isn't there, that there is something good about going to the cinema and having a collective experience as opposed to doing it at home.
Absolutely. I remember going to the cinema to watch In-Betweeners, the In-Betweeners movie, right? Which people might not look at me and go, "Oh, that's a cup of tea." I went. It was a British film. I was like, I'm going to go and see this opening weekend. It was amazing in the cinema. It was packed full of people just wanting to look at the screen and laugh with these 4 losers, basically. It was now in America they probably don't get half those jokes, but we all got them. And it was a very important cultural experience, I would say, going to the cinema to watch that film with people who you might not normally go out and have dinner with or whatever. So that's my thing, is that I want to hear stories. I want to see stories about all kinds of people across the length and breadth of Britain. I mean, Ken Loach has been doing this for years, and he has such a loyal following in Europe. Around the world. That's how he gets his films financed.
Nobody's ever gone to a Ken Loach film and laughed with strangers, let's be honest.
Raining Stones, you will laugh. It's a brilliant film.
I mean, but the other point you made, I mean, I'm pondering audiences here, because if people are choosing to stay at home and watch Netflix, then they're choosing to do it. And you said, again, in your previous evidence, why America has such a strong cinema-going public is because they have crap TV. Now, they don't anymore.
Yes.
They're still...
Yes, but one of my esteemed colleagues here told me earlier that, people who watch movies on streamers also go to the cinema. That, because they love film. So they're watching it on streamers and also cinema. And I'm the same. I will certainly watch things on streamers, but sometimes when a film comes out that I want to see in the cinema, I will go and see it in the cinema. And it's like the Bob Marley film, I'll go and see that in the cinema. Like for the music experience and atmosphere and everything. So I think we do live in a world of streaming, and we have to embrace that. And British cinema is alive and well on certain streamers, So I think going forward, we are looking at both things, We're looking at streaming and also cinemas. We have to look at both.
It's not either or.
No, it's not either or. We're not in that world anymore, and there'll be some other invention pretty soon that we'll also have to start embracing. We're not Luddites. We've got to go with the way our industry is changing. What I'm talking about is who are we to be reflected in the art. You know, Full Monty, great film. Billy Elliot, great films. These are films that told us who we were, you know, and made us laugh and cry because we understood how desperate you have to be in Sheffield. You know, the poverty, unemployment at the time that forced these men to do what they did. But it wasn't a kind of like depressing film. It had that northern chutzpah, you know. An American can't make that film, you know. That's the difference. We make films about us in the way we make them, you know. I can't watch certain content that's set here that's made by Americans because I'm sure like other people, and we just go, huh, what, you know. I'm not going to name the things, but that you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure big period dramas and stuff, and it's because it's made for an American audience. So culturally, I come back to culture here. Yes, we all speak English, but culturally, what we're saying about who we are is the cornerstone of what British cinema is and should be. And I'm lucky enough to have two amazing statistics. One is that I'm the only filmmaker in the entire world that has made a film that has been distributed in every single country in the world, including North Korea. And that is Bend It Like Beckham. I mean, that small film that I struggled to make, you know, for 3 years, is the only one that has been seen in every country. Why? You have to ask yourself why. Because it has a purity about it. It's about racism and about migration and about the struggle of an older generation trying to protect their kids, but then realising that their kids are different and they see the country differently and they've got to go and fly and make their own decisions. This is a universal experience, but set in Southall and Hounslow, you know, but it's universal, which is why it travelled. The other statistic is after that film, people kept wanting me to make a Bollywood film because I was Indian. And I said, I can't make a Bollywood film, I'm British. And they go, no, you're Indian after all. I said, no, I can't do what you do. But if you want me to do that, I'll make my own version. So I took Jane Austen and I adapted Jane Austen into a Bollywood film called Pride and Prejudice. And that is the only film ever that has opened #1 in the UK box office and the India box office. So culturally, those are amazing statistics. And I would love to see filmmakers here, you know, new filmmakers from all different backgrounds being able to have those statistics about their work. And we as a nation should feel really like, wow, that film's from Southall, man. That's from Hounslow, kind of thing. And so I go back to how I started, with people around the world coming up to me all warm and fuzzy because I've made a difference to their lives in that way. And that is what we can do here, I think. If we just go back to having a vision of who we are as a nation and encourage independent filmmaking to take that forward in a very, with integrity is the word I'm looking for, where you have the financial support so that you don't always have to compromise commercially. You know, that's really what we need. And I'm a Sikh and I fight, and that's why I've done it.
Thank you very much. We're beginning to be a bit pushed for time now,
yes.
So we're going to try and do some. Just when I get to Rupa, we're going to. Yeah, Rupa.
But the reason I said that, sorry, I got a bit emotional, is because people do look at me.
Of course.
They look at me to show the way forward. So if I say I'm struggling to make a film with people of colour, that's a terrible thing to be saying. Me saying that to young filmmakers of colour, that's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
That's what has to change. We have to change it so that people can come to me and go, I've got this really great film and it's got a black lead or an Indian lead and I really think it would be great. And instead of me immediately going, oh God, you're going to struggle, you know, I want to be able to say, no, you do this, you go to this person, you do that, you put it together like this, cut your budget down, do this, you can make it.
You've almost anticipated Rupert's question.
That's the difference.
Gurinder, yeah, my heart leaps with pride. You've mentioned Ealing Studios, Southall, fellow sister, daughter of our borough. Really proud to have you here.
Thank you.
Today. I think first time I saw I'm British But, I think you were in a leather jacket and with a bulldog,
Union Jack socks, yes.
That's the one, yeah. It was at a BFI panel where they had shorts, so there was a Tanika Gupta as well, I think.
Right.
And I just think since then, that was probably mid-90s, because I was doing a PhD on this representation.
I made that film in 1990.
Right, okay. I think probably Barging on the Beach was about current then, but it was too long to show in a shorts festival thing.
Right.
I just wondered, since then, and we've got all the quotes from you in 2003 when you came, do you think that you as an Indian woman director have sort of opened up doors for the next generation, or when we look at the figures, it looks a bit shocking. You know, what's happened?
I wish I'd been able to open more doors.
Yeah.
There's still not many of us around. There's a few more. But I worry why there hasn't been another Bend It Like Beckham. Why? Why did nobody try and make 5 more of those? Why did people not go, oh, that made a lot of money, this is the formula, why aren't we doing more of that? Like that's what I feel that an industry should be looking at. Look at the successes and try and mirror those successes.
There's also the sort of the commercial success, but also the content. So this thing that a bunch of us in our PhDs talked about in the 90s, the burden of representation. And you said at the beginning that you sometimes have to sort of compromise. But look, I think the opposite is East, which I really hated myself. I don't know what your opinion on that is, but it kind of divided a lot of us. Do you feel as a British, Asian, Indian, Punjabi, whatever, that you have to put this content to educate people? East, I felt like being banged on the head with the lead piping, because there were so many cliches in there. And when those films were so rare, and you had someone like that I personally didn't like it, but I don't know what you thought. And yeah.
Well, I think this is a very good question, because East is East and My Beautiful Laundrette come from the hearts and minds of mixed race Pakistani guys. Pakistani fathers, English mums. That's their experience. That's not the same experience as me, you know. And so one of the problems I had in setting up Bend It was the guy who ran Channel 4 at the time said, oh, we've already done East is East. Why do we need to do another one? That was literally what he said to me. And my point is that I'm 100% British Punjabi, and my films represent that. So I feel that my films have come from the inside out, and of my experience, you know. And that's not to say that someone couldn't make a film about British Punjabis who's not British and Punjabi. It's just that I have a certain knowledge, you know, that I've grown up with, and my reflex actions and thoughts are all there. And if I'm going to make a film about another community, I go the extra to try and figure that out, you know. But I think that... what was your question? Sorry.
Kind of whether you feel you have to do films about Asianness,
or
no, you could just
I don't,
do a standard film. Do you know what I mean? Will there be a day when...
My life would be
so
a lot easier
normal?
if I didn't. You know, there are films that I've turned down that have been very successful, that you know, that have a small Indian element that I didn't relate to. You know, I didn't relate to those characters, and I couldn't understand those characters, and so I didn't do the movies. And they went on to be very successful movies. But that's okay, you know. It's just not me, and I think that I don't feel it as a burden anymore, because I've given so much pleasure to people. And also just, you know, all the English football champions, you know, and the Americans team, they've all quoted as Bend It Like Beckham being the film that got them into playing soccer in the first place. So every time England plays or there's World Cup, I'm always wheeled onto the news to talk about this. So, like that, I have that. That's fantastic, and I have launched champions as well. So, but I think that I don't feel it as a burden. I enjoy it. I mean, my Christmas film is hilarious. It's so funny, and it will reflect all of us because we all know Dickens, but from this perspective, it's making you. It's saying, here's Dickens over here. Here's the way other people have done it at the BBC and whatever. Here's Gurinder, who's gone woo over to here by doing it in a way that you could never have imagined. But by doing it in a way you could never have imagined, you go back to looking at Dickens and you go, oh, actually, that's very British. So the first person I sent the script to was my friend Stephen Fry. And I said, you're Mr. English Literature, read this. Is it rubbish or is it really good? Because it's Dickens, but done in a totally different cultural way. And thankfully, Stephen, responded super favourably. And I mean, basically he said he cried buckets, when he read it, because he was so moved with just how touching it was to take what an English writer had written, all those years ago, and how relevant it was to Britain today in terms of diaspora culture and the cost of living crisis today.
I think a lot of
and that's what we do. That's what I do as a filmmaker. I show a mirror back to you and go, this is us, and it's political because I want to stand against a lot of the dogma and the rhetoric and the kind of racism that I see expressed politically, out there, and I turn it around by telling you human stories that challenge how people use the race card, I think, in this country.
Yeah, because this quote we've got from 2003, it's exactly what you said again, that you get wheeled out to do all those panels, and I think you might have been there, the one I'm thinking of I went to, on culture, representation and politics, which has a strange acronym, actually.
Well, here I am again. Thank you. but now I'm a different person.
You're reconciled with it. It's not annoying.
Look,
the spokesperson for every British Asian.
Yeah, but I'm also for football now as well.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is that I'm a very proud British filmmaker, which is why I don't have a house in LA. Which is why I entertain American films, but I still, my lens is British. And I just see the world as someone who came here as a baby in the 60s, has grown up here, and culturally want to give back and reflect who I am and who my parents were and who my cousins are and who my friends are in the work that I do. And there's so few people who do that from my perspective. And, I made a historical film called Viceroy's House, which was about the last days of the British in India. And it's a very British film about history and partition. And for Indians, it wasn't anti-Pakistani enough, Interestingly, for Pakistanis, it wasn't anti-Indian enough, but it was a British film, and it looked at new documents that were in the British Library that tell a very different story of why partition happened, and it was about the Cold War and all that, but it had a different narrative to what we think of Churchill and Mountbatten, and that time. It's a different narrative because it's from a British Indian perspective. So that's the difference. And now when someone like me talks about empire, for example, I won't necessarily do it with a stick, because I'm British, but I still have to make my points, about empire and who I am and how we've all got to where we are. But I do it in a very considered way as a British artist, So we have to make our points about history, but we also have to move on. And culturally, that's I want to see period films from my perspective about our joint history. It's time for that, It's time to see, because my kids and their friends don't get taught that at school, And so it's up to someone like me to tell those stories and empower them. Now, I could never get a film like that financed. Never. I know it. I could never get a film like that, the one I'm thinking of in my head. So I'm actually looking at doing it as a theatre piece. And I'm talking to the National Theatre of doing it as a theatre piece. And once it's done as a theatre piece, then it might turn into film. But that's an example of how I'm pushing culturally to try and get my stories out there. So the best thing that you all can do, really, is to help people like me and younger people like me who've got very interesting backgrounds culturally, growing up in all parts of the United Kingdom, tell their stories so that we can all know who we are by watching our own stories, not just American fodder.
And how to break the logjam of these terrible figures. 1.4% of directors are BAME, 3% of producers. We're not our parents' generation who were quite wedded to medicine, law and engineering and pharmacy. How do we get the next generation through to improve?
Well, there's a lot more Indian filmmakers than when I was around now. There's a lot more actors, there's a lot more producers, you know, and I watch the credits, you know, there's a lot more names up there, there's a lot more black people, there's a lot more people trying to do it, and I think that you have the opportunity here to really help. Think of them when you write your comments and you're writing your thing at the end, your report. I would urge you to think about the young me starting out and other people like me, and what is it that they need, so you can sit in a cinema and watch a film set in Bristol or set anywhere in Glasgow, or, you know, set around the country, showing you a heartwarming or just a really great story that reflects who we are, whose voice you're not going to hear otherwise.
Can I just interrupt you on that? You've talked a lot about Film 4 having a vision for British film. You spoke a lot about how the BFI helped when you were starting out. Do you, just very briefly, because we are now super pushed for time, but do you get the sense that the public funders, you know, BFI, Film 4, BBC, are showing the same ambition now that they did in the 90s when that was happening?
I think some of them are, yes. And I think that all those bodies do care about British cinema. And I think that they have all done what they think is right, you know, to launch new voices and develop talent. Absolutely, I would say that. And I would say they all need supporting to be able to do their job better, because again, I come back to the fact that we're an industry. You know, BBC, Channel 4, you know, they have to support, but also there has to be a certain commercial imperative there, and if we have a larger chunk as independent filmmakers, it's easier for us to bring the rest of the finance in and get those films made. Yeah. But that larger chunk comes back to you, you know, it comes back to the industry. But also for every one film that does get made with a voice for someone from Leeds, say, or, you know, Glasgow, someone else sits there going, I can do that, I'm going to do that. And that's how it grows. We see ourselves reflected, and that's what inspires us to do other things.
Thank you, Chair. I've been sitting here trying to pitch my fantastic Wolverhampton constituency for a film, because we've got the Kabaddi World Cup and a massive Sikh community, so I'm trying to sort of tempt you to make your next film in Wolverhampton. But apart from that, because I'm very excited about the Kabaddi World Cup.
I actually started my career at Radio WM. And one of my first stories was in Wolverhampton when the Dunlop factory caught fire, and I was the reporter on the ground.
Well, you're very welcome back.
Oh, no, Wolverhampton.
I would like to turn to the use of AI in filmmaking.
Yes.
And as a director and a writer, I think if I were making films, I'd be really tempted to max out on some technology. I don't know if it would be cheaper or allow my imagination to sort of run riot. So because we are pushed for time, I'm just going to ask for your general thoughts around you using AI and where you're comfortable or not comfortable, and also maybe touch around AI using your body of work. to teach itself how to, where's the ethics and the morals around
Well,
it?
this is the $64,000 question for us right now. Where is this all going? How do we use it? How can we use it with integrity? It is an amazing technology that has now been presented to us, and I watch my son every night on Fortnite or whatever it is he's playing with all his mates, and there's all these women running around doing all this, and to him they're real. These are real characters, and so that world is with us. We have to embrace this world. What we have to do is figure out how to use it to our best advantage. I think the problem I have with AI is it's very generic. Everything is very generic. How you create things, what the storytelling, it's generic. So what we will always need is those specific voices to either manipulate AI or specific stories that AI can't
As
simulate.
a writer, I think that's evident, but
Yes.
perhaps if you're directing and you can have someone's image. So I was saying to Giles earlier, I could resurrect Rudolph Valentino to star in a new film. No
Yes.
copyright issues, no. So that would then be down to the tech person. If my imagination as a writer is what's going to give that film legs, is that something you've thought?
It's a bit creepy to me right now. It feels
But
a
the
bit
gimmick
creepy.
would be
But I think that I feel that as an industry we need to safeguard creativity, and I think as long as you're not being duped and you're aware that this is computer generated and this character is not a real character. I think it's when you're being passed off, you're being told that this is a real person because they've taken someone's image, but they've created a false image. I think those are the sort of questions that we have to start asking ourselves. I mean, I had a very interesting conversation with my makeup woman the other day because she said, well, this technology is there to make people look younger, absolutely, and you can do that on screen. Harrison Ford in that movie absolutely looked much younger, but she said he still moved like an old man. His gait was still like an old man, so you didn't buy it. You can look at it in a picture and go, yes, but his mannerisms and everything, were old. So I think we've got a ways to go before we believe it, but I do think it's a scary thing for me right now as a creative to know that someone, a friend of mine actually who loves ChatGPT said, why don't you do a sequel to Bend It Like Beckham? And I said, maybe, I'll think about it. And he put that into ChatGPT and sent me some pages and said, look, I've done it, what do you think? And it was the biggest pile of rubbish I've ever seen. It was terrible because it was very generic. It was very generic and really bad. But I'm sure it's going to get more sophisticated as we go on. And I think people will use it, and I think it's up to us to be in control of it, not have it control us.
Sorry, Chair, but very briefly. So the Hollywood strikes around AI and writers fearing for their futures. Can I just ask finally?
Very justified, very justified. I'm sure during the strike there were scrupulous people, writing scripts using AI, and then they will then take what they've done and give them to other writers, human writers, to modify and make better. I'm sure that's going on. That was going on during the strike.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gurinder. Thank you so much for your time today. You've
You're
been really generous
welcome.
with us and appearing again after 20 years in front of the panel.
See you again.
See you
Another
next
20
year
years.
in, a couple more decades.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been very interesting for me as well, and and if there's anything else I can do that can help your cause, I'm always ready to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I invite our second panel to join us, please? We've got a team now that are going to explore production, distribution, an exhibition of films in Britain.
I need a role in something.
Champion local.
And we're joined by John McVay, who's the CEO at Pact. We've got Andy Leyshon, who's the CEO at the Film Distributors Association, and Phil Clapp, who's the CEO of the UK Cinema Association. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to actually start these questions with you, Giles Watling, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning. Morning. Good to see you, and thank you so much for coming today. Just before I start in the main body of my question, we are fortunate in this country. We've been punching above our weight for years, and we do extraordinarily well in terms of content that we produce. We have the largest independent film studio anywhere at Pinewood, but I just wonder that perhaps in this country we focus too much on the large box office busters. And we leave the smaller grassroots independent productions behind. John, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, well, I think listening to Gurinder there just made me so proud to having worked at Pact for 23 years. Yeah. She's why I get up in the morning. A brilliant British indie film producer who has survived, but as you heard in her opening comments, many don't. And that's because the world has got much tougher, particularly over the past 10 years. The UK is a very successful audiovisual economy. We're the second largest in the world. We should applaud that and celebrate that. It creates jobs, opportunities for many of our fellow citizens and businesses. However, the indie sector has been sort of left behind in that good news story. And that's basically because, as you heard from Gurinder, raising the money to make the films to the quality with the cast we need to attract an audience or financiers has got much, much harder, particularly since 2015, 2016. Overall investment has declined. We've supplied a whole lot of evidence for the committee and indeed the government detailing that. And we did a report in 2017 which basically showed then that we were facing an ongoing decline in investment and box office share for British film. Yes. And in 2022, the BFI produced a report which showed that it got worse. And I remember saying at the time to Ben Roberts, the CEO of the BFI, I'm depressingly reassured because it's only got worse since then. And that's from a number of factors, post-COVID changes in market behaviour, cinemas are not yet back to the capacity that we saw pre-COVID, more choice for consumers, they can stay at home and watch a movie on Netflix and not go to see it in the cinema, cost of living pressures, but also domestic inflation. Our labour market rates have soared since 2020, our cast costs have soared, which means if you're an indie, the amount of money you have to raise to make a quality film has got harder and harder. Right. So less and less money goes on screen because you're just paying more costs just to make it.
Just to get it produced. Yeah.
Just to try and make the thing. And of course we all know, as Gurinder showed, if you make a great movie, 6.5 million, oh please if we could make more of those, you can sell it for 17 million at Sundance. If you can make a great quality product, and we can, we have the talent, we have the skills, we can do really well and culturally and commercially. But getting to the point where we can raise enough money is getting harder and harder, takes longer and longer, and sadly too many people, I see this in my younger producers, who having made their first low budget feature film, give up after that. Because there's nowhere to go. Are we missing a trick though?
Because we won't have, from what you say, the talent to run through to the bigger productions because we are ignoring the smaller productions, independent, the grassroots.
Yeah, the indie sector, and this is why we've had support from all the US studios and US streamers for our proposals, is they recognise, and we should all recognise, that the British independent film sector is the R&D lab for talent. It's where Christopher Nolan started. It's where Paul Greengrass, it's where John Boyega, it's where Gurinder started. That is our hothouse of talent. And that's where people get, and I hope from what Gurinder said about the comments about inclusion, more talents can actually avail themselves of those opportunities. So we have an even richer film and audiovisual culture.
So we've identified the problems. How do we strengthen both domestic and international audiences' demand for British films?
Well, I think when we make a good quality, well-funded British film, and Trainspotting is one of them, and Gurinder's films are, they do really well. In Betweeners was the single biggest grossing British comedy ever produced. May not be to your tastes, but it did very, very well. So when we can make films to the quality that can attract an audience, you will get a good return. It's getting to that budget point. So that's why our proposals are for a certain tier of budgets for feature films, which would really focus on British independent feature film. We are proposing a hike in the current film tax credit. And I remember in 2003, the previous committee's report on the British film industry actually was the precursor to the film tax credit getting introduced in 2007 under the Secretary of State Tessa Jowell. So I think it's a very timely moment, the sort of bookends of this. We'd lost the tax credit at the Section 42, 48 in 2001. The Parliament had an investigation which recommended the creation of a new tax credit. That drove inward investment as well. And now we need to do something in order to sustain and stimulate our own domestic industry.
Absolutely. Can I just now ask the distributor's point of view, Andy, on that? How do we do that, improve the domestic and international audience on British film?
Well, I mean, I should probably try and explain what distribution is first as well, shouldn't I? I'm not
sure
if
perhaps,
everyone necessarily knows. We tend to be the bit between these two chaps.
Yeah.
So they're the supply, they're the demand. Where in the middle we get films from one to the other, and fully supportive of all of the proposals on either side. But actually, we need to invest more in getting tax relief for distribution on a much smaller scale, but with a higher return to get these films seen. That's our part. So I think in terms of distribution, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, it's very simply, how do we strengthen domestic and international audiences' demand for British films? How do we go about that from a distribution point of view?
I think the tax breaks, looking at more cultural voices, going to wider audiences. I mean, there were 1,000 films released in cinemas last year. When I started in the industry, there were about 300 a year. So on average, 19 a week. This last weekend, 20 films came out. You know, everybody has a voice. It's great that so many different types of films are being made, but they need to be seen. Audiences need to be aware of these films. So I think it's more getting awareness out there and connecting with audiences.
What more can the British, the big cinema chains be doing?
They're doing pretty well. I would say that as he sat next to me.
But to support independent British films, I mean.
They do support. Phil can talk more to this, but they do support British films. But you know, the awareness is the problem. Is getting the films out there with a sufficient marketing budget and publicity campaign, and getting audiences aware of them for them to break through at the cinema.
All comes down to the bucks. Yes, please, Phil.
Yeah, can I come in? I mean, your starting point about the UK industry kind of punching above its weight, I think, is well taken. Typically, in terms of box office, we've been pre-COVID and still post-COVID in the top 6 in the world, which is clearly, you know, kind of something we want to maintain. The reality is the difference between a good year and a very good year for the UK cinema industry is not the performance of one or two major US titles. It's the performance of everything else, essentially, you know, and that's true in terms of maintaining a cinema-going habit, but that's also true of drawing in different audiences who might not like the big superhero films or the big action films, etc. And it's undoubtedly true, I think, that particularly with the impact of COVID, that part of the market has not recovered. So it's difficult to quantify it, but that gap between where we were and where we are now, I would say a significant part of that is not actually a result of the studio strike or a result of what is happening at the major US studios. It's that more diverse content, which is not...
That brings me neatly on to my next question. So are we now looking towards streaming as another way to get films made and seen? And what might be the consequences of that?
So John can speak more authoritatively on the production side of streaming. Gurinder referred to a conversation we had outside. You know, it's often presented that, you know, cinema and streaming are in some kind of fight to the death. Yeah. The reality is the vast majority of our best customers, the best customers, the people I represent, are also the biggest consumers of film on streaming. And they will pick and choose which films. So it's not that what's good for streaming is bad for cinema and vice versa. And undoubtedly, streaming has brought more money into the production side, but often around a particular genre or category of film, which isn't actually meeting that gap.
We're talking specific. Yeah.
And since you asked Andy the question, and I'll respond to it, Andy is right, of course, that the larger operators do a huge amount around trying to support British film. The challenge is, and it sounds like a glib answer, they can only work with what they're given in terms of the quality of those films and also the support that's there. It's Andy mentioned 1,000 films released into cinemas last year. It's an incredibly competitive market, and unless you have the marketing budget which allows you to cut through with the customer and get them to understand. And the point was made previously by Gurinder around cast and we want original stories. Why would cinemas not want to draw in a broader audience and to reflect the British cultural narrative? The challenge we've had, and this is a pre-COVID and a post-COVID thing, is the number of films which actually allow them to do that has diminished year on year. And so unless the type of changes which John and Andy are suggesting are made, it's very difficult to see how we turn that ship around, to be perfectly honest.
It all comes down to financing on the marketing side. John, you wanted to speak?
Yes, no, I think Phil's right. I mean, my members are like Gurinder, want to make fantastic movies that you're going to spend your hard-earned cash on. We're not making enough of them to the quality that we need to. When we do, the market will actually embrace them. Phil's members want those movies. And I remember when we were working on all the measures to try and save our industry during the pandemic, one of the things that helped exhibitors was we had some British movies they could show because the studios weren't releasing. And that was great. It was a fillip at the time. I wish it was something that was constant. I wish it was every weekend we had a great British movie that we would decide to go and see. We can do it. We have the talent. We have the ideas. We have amazing producers like Gurinder. You heard her. She was saying her problem isn't ideas. Her problem isn't her cultural imperatives. Her problem is raising the money and how long it takes. So that's the problem. If you sort that out, and also if we could get some support to get more visibility for those films through support for P&A, we can get the films into the cinemas and British people will go and see them. As I said, Bend It Like Beckham, the Full Monty, we've got a long list of successful products. And Gurinder said something important right at the beginning there. It's a passport to the world, but it's also a passport for the world to us. Seeing us around the world in our movies is a really important thing. It defines who we are now, not some history book concept of who the British people are, but who we are now.
Yeah, it seems to me very cyclical because I remember David Putnam saying he was going to reinvigorate the film industry, 30 years ago. And we're here again. And we're at another crossroads. But we need sustained tax breaks and sustained investment.
We need planned, secure investment. Look, and the great thing about the tax breaks, if government were to approve them at the level we're proposing, in the way we're proposing, is it doesn't cost the taxpayer a penny until you use them. No. It's not grant and aid where you have to give a budget and it goes in the P&L. It's a potential, and what it does is it incentivises the market. It's exactly when we were working on the high-end TV tax credit, which stimulated all the inward investment we've seen from the streamers in the UK. It was a potential. It changed the whole market because it gave investors confidence and it gave producers something in their pocket to go out and raise the money to make their stories. And I think that's the British way of doing it, as opposed to maybe the French way, which is just set up a huge public fund and you have to spend it every year regardless. The great thing about tax credits is they change how people behave in the market and they create new behaviours.
And we may be able to sell Britain, UK across the world. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Giles. We've seen over the last few weeks how the impact that TV can have, with the success of Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. What's the takeaway from that on how easy it is for independent productions to be able to tell those kind of stories? Where are the obstacles in them being able to do that? John, did you want to start?
Well, I don't think we have really. Gurinder obviously raised some issues about casting and how financiers may approach, unknown Asian actors or other talent, and I think that's sad, and I think that's something that we have to change. I think I have to give plaudits to ITV for having made TV drama, short TV drama series, and it shows you the value of public service broadcasting. That would never have been made by Netflix or Apple or Amazon, not their type of thing. And it was great that ITV made it, our biggest commercial broadcaster, that they made a story that had such impact. So I think, I go back to the fundamentals of our sort of creative economy. We are brilliant storytellers. We have the talent. We can make quality product. And if we can finance it, or someone like ITV is going to finance it, we can tell stories that make a real difference for us as a people.
Anyone want to add to that?
Not particularly. I mean, I think all it is summed it up brilliantly there. We're all quite proud, I think, as a nation of that programme.
And to what extent is the fortune of the UK production, distribution, exhibition sector interlinked, and to what extent is that understood by policymakers and reflected in the way that they respond?
Shall I kick off?
Why not?
Not as much as it should be is the answer to your final question, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we do what we can to link up, the people on the ground so that the people who are making the films understand the challenges and the opportunities of distribution and what it is that, we're a member organisation representing the broadest possible range of cinemas, from the major multiplexes down to the majority of our members are single-site, single-screen operators. We try to, kind of foster understanding, but sometimes policy is in silos. I mean, this is clearly a familiar refrain in a whole range of policy. So the idea of having some greater connectivity between policy and having some greater reflection of the interdependence that we see on the ground, as it were, with the people we represent, will always be welcome, to be perfectly honest. Some of that is resource driven. The BFI do what they can with the resource they have, but inevitably sometimes that means they're only dealing on my side of the house with only part of the sector. So they're only dealing primarily with specialised venues, etc., whereas we would strongly argue that there's a huge opportunity to be had by them working with the broad range of people and the broad range of infrastructure we represent. But sometimes it's just the pressure, I think, that is on policymakers to deliver and to be experts in what we would all say are very, very complex areas, to be perfectly honest.
Do you think that so we heard from somebody who gave us some evidence that so many cinemas up and down the UK are just not breaking even at the moment, and they cited the lack of the sort of big movies coming down the track that are bringing in the audiences. But we've heard from Andy that there are hundreds of films being made every week. I mean, to what extent are cinemas part of the problem in providing audiences with enough variety at the box office?
So the vast majority of the people that we represent, the operators we represent, are commercial entities. So their reason for being is to get people in to cinemas. So there's no reason why they wouldn't want to provide the broadest possible range of cinemas. The reality is that when they look at the films that are on offer, they clearly have to make a decision on, first of all, is this a film my audience will like? And secondly, is this a film that my audience might like more than the film I'm currently showing, or a different audience might like other than the film I'm currently showing? And if you're a single screen, single venue, and you have the number of films coming out each week that are currently coming, there are some clearly which will be immediately seen as not for that audience, and some which might, and some which certainly are. So it's a very challenging issue. There is no sense, and as I said, we're a broad church of membership, and we have, large multiplex operators and specialised venues and art houses, etc., etc. All of them will say to you, I think, and they're always outliers, but all of them will say to you, what we want is more, better and better supported British independent films, and we will put them in front of audiences. We will do what we can in terms of marketing them, but each cinema venue, no matter how big or how small, can only do so much, to be perfectly honest. And it's around the quality of I use a very reductionist phrase, but the quality of the supply line, which is the issue, to be perfectly honest. If I look at, obviously we'll get into the discussion we had with Gurinder earlier on UGC, but if I look at the largest multiplexes, Odeon, View and Cineworld, who are around 75% of the UK market in terms of box office, each of them have their own programmes which are intended to foreground and promote independent film or British independent film. But there's even with the marketing power they have, there's only so much they can do. And we went from a position whereby in 2015 there were 33 British independent films which made them more than £1 million at the box office, to 2023 where there were just 11, essentially. So it's an element of kind of an uphill struggle, to be perfectly honest, without the content and without the support that comes from having relevant, well-made, well-told and well-supported films.
Yes, John?
Yeah, and I think Phil's point there is is true, because the box office share in 21 was 5% and 22 8%. That's in the UK. Globally, box office share for British film was 1.2%. So I don't think that's because of appetite. I don't think it's because exhibitors don't want to show British films. We need to supply better films. They can be about anything. They can be about all of us. They can be all the stories we want to tell. But we have to get them to the quality and the investment that will encourage audiences to part with their money to go and see them. And that's the challenge. If I make a micro low budget movie, I might see it. You might see it in a festival if you go. You might be lucky to see it at a screening in the South Bank. Generally, it's not going to get a general release, and that's sad, because the ladder. When I started in the industry 40 years ago, there used to be a sort of ladder. You made a film, you made a better one, you got a bigger budget. You progressed onwards, and you heard from Gurinder, her career. That's sort of gone now. We make lots of micro-budget films. We make a small handful of big-budget films, say 10 to 15 million. The bit in between doesn't really exist, and that's the bit we need to nurture and develop.
To what extent is there still the patience to let those movies kind of do sometimes the slow burn they need to do before they get to? So I think back to Gurinder mentioned the Full Monty. Yeah. I remember going to see the Full Monty when it very first came out, and it didn't really have a great deal of chat around it. Yeah. And I was sort of it was quite an empty cinema when I first saw it, and then gradually the buzz began to happen, and I went back to see it again with with some of my family members some weeks later, and it was heaving. You couldn't book a ticket to go and see it because the word had got out. This is a great British film. To what extent these days would a film like that be able to have? Would anyone have the patience in the cinema sector to sort of wait and see what happens with a great British film like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think opening weekend and word of mouth is still really powerful. I remember Trainspotting when it first came out was huge, but it was mostly because Channel 4 was marketing the hell out of it because they put money into it. So I think if we can find a way to support the marketing and the social media and profiling those films, we can build audiences now with digital media and social media. We can do that, but that costs quite a lot of money to do it well. And to Andy's point, if we can get money to make better films, if we can also then support them to build an audience, that's great. And then for the exhibitors, they've got people selling out theatres for them.
It's definitely true that it's much more difficult to play the long game now than it was, both in terms of the number of films, but to the point you made around the financial state of the sector. The industry, my side of the industry, took a hit of at least £2 billion during COVID. We're still in recovery from that, and we're some way from full recovery from that. So actually making an argument that this film might be a successful film on down the track, but there's this film which is successful now, and choosing between them is actually quite a difficult thing now, particularly, I think, for cinemas to do. There may be the ability to take a longer-term view of when we get back to that, but at this moment, the imperative for all of the people we represent is bluntly to make money, to be perfectly honest, in order to make up for the shortfalls that they've experienced, not just during the COVID period, but from the ripple effects of the cost of living crisis and other things that have hit them.
Amy?
Thanks. I want to explore the effects, the long-term effects and short-term effects of the strike that the American industry's just gone through. And picking up something you said about the COVID period, where the studios weren't producing their usual product, so actually there was a sort of mini renaissance of mass showing of UK movies in an attempt to grasp some sort of light from the gloom. Are we going to have to see a similar thing here, where there's just less product coming basically from over the Atlantic, so you might get more showing for a short period of UK films?
That would be the hope, but it goes back to the point about what quality and quantity and how supported are those films, to be perfectly honest. So there
the
may be, and the awareness, and obviously, you know, the cut through of those things. Essentially, what the strike did undoubtedly was it delayed the recovery of the global sector. But talking specifically about the UK sector, you know, if I talk to our broad membership, there is absolute confidence that we will recover. The strike has just pushed that back, probably for 12 months, to be perfectly honest. So there are undoubtedly opportunities for British independent film and other studio film over the coming months, to be perfectly honest. But it is again around, you know, at a basic level, cinemas are absolutely aware of their cultural and their social role, but at the basic level, it's often just a commercial decision on, is this a film which is going to get people through the door? Is this a film which actually is going to deepen or broaden audience? The issue we have, and Andy and I are part of a group which has tracked this from the beginning of the COVID period, the issue we have post-COVID actually is not getting them back. We've got back pretty much everyone we think we're going to get back. It's getting them back to the level of frequency of cinema going that they enjoyed before that, essentially. And unless you continue to refresh the offering in front of them with things they might want to see, that will always be an uphill battle.
And what are the numbers on that?
So we've got about 82% of the pre-COVID cinema going public back. And if you look, without getting to the theology, if you look at the churn of people becoming cinema goers or no longer becoming cinema goers because of changes in life circumstance, etc., we think that's pretty much a full return. But across the piece, levels of frequency of cinema going amongst those people who are cinema goers, there are kind of are down around 40%, essentially. You know, there are some, you know, bright lights. You know, families with children and young people are a little up, maybe, but across the broad demographic, particularly with an aging audience, it's down. And we need to find ways of encouraging people to return more often, as well as encouraging new people to return.
And just out of interest, 40% down means what, 10 to 6? I mean, how often do people...
So across the piece, pre-COVID, the average, and this is a very, very blunt measure, the average per head cinema going was 2.3 times per year, essentially. And of course, that's a bell curve, with some people not going at all and some people going massive times. I think we're probably talking about, you know, the average person who went maybe 6 times a year now going 3 or 4 times a year. And that's simply because there's nothing we're putting in front of them, and that obviously is not just the film but also the offer, but primarily the film, which encourages them to get out. There are, of course, cost of living issues within that. You know, people have less expendable, less money to spend, but disposable income, that was the phrase I was searching for. But actually, it seems to be primarily, when we do these surveys, around, there was nothing I saw at my local cinema that I actually wanted to go to see, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, to your point, I think it's maybe an opportunity we've missed because we weren't able to finance films to take the opportunity. So that's the problem. And also the corollary of that was a lot of freelancers who found themselves suddenly unemployed because of the American strikes. If we'd had a more viable film industry, maybe they would have found employment there. They didn't. Some of them left the industry. Some of them had to go and claim public support. I think that's sad because that's skills we might lose or talent we might lose when there might have been another place that they could have got an opportunity to pursue their careers, earn a living, pay their mortgages, all the things we want from our brilliant, crafty technicians and freelancers.
And as the strikes recede and things get back to normal, are there any lessons for the UK industry that you draw from what happened there?
Well, that was one lesson. If we had a more viable film industry ourselves, it might have helped people navigate that strike. Secondly, on that, I think it's clear a lot of those workers weren't mobile. They had grown up working for American movies or American drama, and they hadn't really had a connection with domestic production. And I think that's a challenge, to have a more mobile workforce, so they're used to working. Many years ago, I used to be a freelance sound recordist and sound engineer, and I worked in advertising, theatre, music, film, TV. Wherever I could get a gig, I'd go and work. That's not so much now. We've got people who have become more specialist. I only do high-end drama for Netflix. So we need to look at that, but you've got to give them an option. You've got to give them an alternative place of employment for that to happen. So.
Have we become too dependent on inward investment? We've had this great boom with the streamers, and did the strikes reveal that we were too dependent on that?
No, I think it meant there was a large part of our workforce where that was their only source of income. So they didn't have the sort of multi-source income that you would hope, so they can navigate the ups and downs. Being a freelancer is always an ups and down career, whether you're a journalist or an artist or a dancer. That's the nature of the beast. But I think it did highlight a problem there. I don't think we're dependent on inward investment. I think we should celebrate the fact that we attract so much inward investment. It's led to studio developments across the country. To Alex's point earlier, there's studios being built all over the UK. Hopefully that starts to develop clusters for local people to access opportunities. That's all. A lot of that is driven by us, our ability to attract inward investment, and that's a good thing. It's created new jobs, it's invested in technology. So I would much rather we had the money here in the UK than it being in France or Italy or Australia. So I'd never say it was something detrimental. But if America sneezes, we often catch a cold when it comes to things like strikes.
Which my final quick question was: are there any rumblings that we could see strikes here, or is the industry structured in a different sort of way or behaves?
We have a very different process in the UK. We are constantly at a pact and negotiates all the collective agreements for writers, directors and actors. We have constant dialogue with all our colleagues about all sorts of issues, pay, terms and conditions, AI. So we have a much more ongoing discussion. Indeed, before the American strikes actually happened, we were sitting down with Equity, the Actors Union, and saying, what do you think about AI? Maybe we should be talking about this, because clearly it will throw up issues and it will throw up challenges for us as producer creatives, but also for performers and other creatives. And we have to find a way to navigate all that in an intelligent way.
Thank you very much. Alex?
Right. We heard from Gurinder about the importance of having tiered tax relief and its impact on the independent production sector. What would increasing the tax relief for those lower budget independent films achieve? John, what do you think?
Well, it would, a number of things. It would de-risk investment for other people. So if I truck up to distributors and they're saying, well, the market can only give you 2 million, and I go, well, I've got 3 million in my pocket already, we're much closer to financing the movie more quickly. So, and bear in mind that films work around talent availability. So if you're my lead actor, hopefully in my next movie, your availability will dictate when I can get you, but you're also core to the financing, because Andy or Phil will look down to who's in this. Do we know them? Is this something we can market? Do the audiences know them? That's all part of how people assess risk in our business. I mean, I got asked many years ago by a minister in DCMS, so John, why don't all our movies, why aren't they all successful? And I said, well, if I knew that, Minister, I wouldn't be here. I'd be working in Hollywood and I'd be incredibly rich. So what we do, the potential of that investment changes how things are seen. And it also allows me to be more ambitious. You heard Gurinder there about, I have to compromise, I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, maybe if I've got a bit more money in my pocket, that Asian actor, I'll insist it's an Asian actor, because I'm bringing 40% of the budget to the table. So I'm a major player in that. I'm not a minority player. I'm a major investor with the support of the British taxpayer in order to make that movie. So I think it does. Will it lead to another Bend It Like Beckham or another X, Y, or Z? I don't know. I hope so. But it changes how people, the confidence they have, and also the market confidence in those products.
I mean, to sort of extend that point, so are you saying that essentially if we extended the tax relief, we might see more new British talent emerge, more diverse range of talent, both behind and in front of the camera?
I would absolutely hope so. It would give us a chance to what Gurinder said when she was waxing lyrical about Film 4's, and I was around at the time. I was actually in production around Trainspotting's release. It would change the zeitgeist. It would change people's approach, and that's now. Will it lead to be more diversity? I hope so. Will it lead to new talent? Absolutely. Who, what, and when? I don't know, but I think that's where Parliament and governments can not sort of dictate how things work in reality, but they can create the environment for people to take those opportunities. And I think that's really important as parliamentarians. That's how you make the world change. Saying it must be X, Y, or Z, in my experience, like they do in many other countries with film funds, isn't really a good way to do it. Britain's more eclectic, it's more diverse. And I think creating a framework where people can take a chance and find that new talent and try to get it financed and try to get into the cinemas is a really positive and energetic way to change things.
Andy, what do you think the impact would be of creating specific relief for print and advertising spend on lower budget films?
Well, it should work in simpatico with John's ask for a higher relief as well. I mean, what you've got to understand is distribution is an inherently risky business. Distributors are entrepreneurs. Every new release is like a new startup. They generally break even. If they make a profit, great. A lot of them fail. So to be encouraged to spend more, to risk more, to chase more, to go wider, to get better awareness, I think that would be eminently sensible. And again, to get those films that are going to be encouraged to be out there, seen much wider, and for Phil's members to play them and have many more films to play. I mean, I think only just over 5% of all releases play in a saturation 600 plus cinemas. Most films will release on under 50 screens. We don't want that. We want films to be playing a lot wider. We want films to be playing everywhere. So yeah, we costed it out actually based on the BFI's last economic review into independent film 2022. We've been costing out a proposal, and we think it would cost taxpayer 9.3 million, but we'd get a return on investment of £2.54 for every pound spent. So it's a no-brainer from our side.
Sounds like it's well within our fiscal rules as well, so it wouldn't create instability in the market. Okay. The other element of this, obviously, is inward foreign investment, particularly from the US. How do we see in terms of the balance? How can we ensure that we create more independent British films without losing that overseas investment and grow the pie? How are we going to grow the pie here and balance this out?
Well, I mean, I think the current film tax credit, high-end TV tax credit for inward investors is generous. That's why they're here. It works. It's a very good system that we have, and all credit to Parliament and the government of the day in 2007 and we worked on that to design how the tax credit works. I think it's very attractive. We have English language, we have facilities, we have skills. I don't think they're going to go away because we want to support our own film industry. That's not what I hear from them. They recognise that that we need to have our own indigenous industry because it's the seedbed for a lot of the talent. John Boyega started on a great British indie film called Attack the Block, and then went on to become a global superstar. Chris Note, I mean, we can go on. So they recognise that actually having something precisely targeted at a range of films, which will mostly support British independent. But look, if Netflix said to me, look, you've got a brilliant British comedy, it's 15 million, we would like to help support that. Why not? That'd be great. It might stimulate that investment. So I don't think it's, if we were to do something for a tax credit at that range, that it would be detrimental to inward investment.
Yeah. So on the flip side, I mean, I've personally asked some of the big streamers about supporting indoor production, post-production facilities in the north of England, obviously specifically in West Yorkshire. But should they be doing more to support the British film industry? And if so, what measures would you recommend in terms of streaming services, the big streamers? John, do you want to?
Well, I think they should put their money into projects that they think are going to be great for their audiences. I don't think it's saying there must be a quota as they do in some other countries. If we could stimulate investment, if I've got a great project that they want to invest in, great. It will be then my choice whether I want to take that deal or not, because like Gurinder, I might choose that actually a theatrical release with global sales is my preferred option. So I wouldn't want it to be, well, we've got to do something on the streamers, so British film is only supported that way, because commercially that may not be good for me or my business. So I think having the mixed economy and a mixed ecology is really good in the UK. My TV drama producers work for British production broadcasters, and they own the rights because of the terms of trade, but they also work for Netflix and they make a nice margin. They can choose what they want to do, and I think that mixed ecology is very healthy.
So we heard Gurinder say about in France that they have to set a screen aside in large multiplexes for French films. They also have a tax on cinema receipts. What do you think about the sort of French system, French incentives, or do you think we should have other incentives for cinemas to screen domestic films?
In general, I've been doing this job long enough that when anyone starts a sentence in France, I know what's coming, essentially. And there are good and bad things about the French system, but the thing that needs to be understood is it's a very finely tuned ecosystem where you can't pick one bit out and not others. So for example, French cinemas benefit from a regulated window. No film is allowed to be played other than in a cinema for 4 months after its release, etc. And there are a whole range of levies, etc. I think generally the view, and as I said, in terms of our membership, we have the major multiplexes, and then many who specialise in independent film and foreign language film and world cinema. In general view, there is a presumption against levies. They're always seen as very blunt. Certainly, I think in terms of anything which takes further money out of the pocket of cinema operators at the time when that's at a premium would be bad. I think also the idea, and absolutely, appreciate what Gurinder said around UGC, who are the forerunners of Cineworld in the UK territory. The idea of allocating a screen whereby you only show British independent film, all the evidence we have is that if you label something as good for the audience, they tend to stay away, to be perfectly honest. It needs to be something which they see as a value in and of itself. The BFI are currently launching a project called Escapes, which offers cinema tickets for free to British independent films. Now, there is a sizable body of, there are always different opinions on my side, but there's a sizable body of opinion of cinema operators on my side of all shapes and sizes, that the moment you offer someone for free, you send a very clear signal about its relative value, to be perfectly honest. This isn't something we think you will want to pay for, so here, have it, essentially. Now, the project is at its very early stages, and the proof of the pudding will be in the impact that has. But I think that allowing the small M market to hold sway, allowing cinema operators of all shapes and sizes to take a view on the quality of a film and its attractiveness to their audience is the way to go, rather than diktats around screens or diktats around levies. If a cinema wants to allocate a screen to, British independent film or world cinema or whatever, that's, fine, that's their decision. But it does, sorry to bang on about this, it does basically go back to the quality of the content and its attractiveness to the audience and the awareness amongst the audience that it actually exists. There have, over the last, even post-COVID, been a number of British, maybe not independent films, but certainly films telling British stories which have done, by common reckoning, less well than they might have done, simply because audience didn't know they existed. And by the time they did know they existed, to your point, Madam Chair, they were off the screen, to be perfectly honest. So it's about the quality of the film, it's about the awareness of the film, and it's about the relatability to the audience rather than sticking a label on something, to be perfectly honest. I mean, if you want to kind of quantify the potential prize on offer here, John made the point around what happened during COVID, where UK cinemas were less able to rely on British independent film than were our European counterparts, because they had a pre-established relationship with those distributors and they had, an understanding amongst their audience of the film. But even now, when the impacts of the strike in the US are impacting across European territories, if I look at, put France to one side, if I look at comparable European territories such as Germany, Spain and Italy, we were up box office 8% last year. Germany was up 25%, Spain was up 31%, Italy was up 60%. That is almost entirely due to their domestic films. That is what's been the engine room of their recovery in the absence of, they receive the same US films that we do, and actually we probably over-index slightly US films because of a common language, but not to the extent that explains those figures.
Can I add a point to that, because I think it's very germane to the discussion. The European Audiovisual Observatory released a report last week which showed that the sort of combined gross public sector support for European film is now close to 50%. So that's maybe why those European cinema chains are doing so well with their own domestic product. And that's what we don't have here. So that's the market we're competing against as well. When I release a film in the UK and Europe, I'm competing against much better funded domestic product as well as American. So I'm just an English language film. I'm going to be dubbed in Germany, subtitled elsewhere. But if I want to release through Andy's members into Europe, I'm up against more competition to try and get screen time as well. So it's not just our own domestic culture and opportunity. That's the issue in the broader market as well. So.
Thank you, Alex. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go back to AI. I'm having an AI morning this morning. John, are we doing enough to sort of future-proof what's coming with AI so we avoid industrial disputes and sort of actors and performers having their image kind of used in AI? Is the framework there already?
We're in active discussion with all the other copyright owners, so actors, writers, directors, about how AI is used. I mean, the key thing here is if I wanted to use your image or your performance, so you maybe performed in something and you're no longer available, or you've got another job, and can I negotiate with you under agreed permissions to use your image capture, if you want, your image performance capture for some other piece of work? That seems to be a perfectly reasonable thing. If I do it without your permission, it's completely unreasonable. That's the big issue. We use AI already. Lord of the Rings was AI. We use AI in every part of our processing of film and TV, to colour correct, to do a whole range of other things, for audio, for background. We already use AI. It's not an alien technology for our industry. What the next gen of AI, where you can effectively sample someone and then recreate them or recreate works, does need to be thought through, and it needs to be properly discussed, and then there needs to be some agreements about, if we want to do that, how do we do it, and how are you appropriately compensated for that?
We had an evidence session from an actor who everyone who was on his production had been scanned, sort of full body scanned. And when I asked what the purpose was, what was in his contract about it, he didn't know. And he
I would hope his agent knew.
I hope so as well. But I think those issues of retrospective permission, or
there will be issues. I mean, your point about a famous dancer earlier, and could you use their images to recreate that character? There will be historical problems because people hadn't given permission, because we didn't know this technology was coming. So there will be things like that. I think going forward, we are, as producers, we create copyright in our works, but we acquire copyright from other copyright owners. So we've all got a responsibility to find ways to do this which is clear, which is understandable, not just to the agent but to the actor, so that we can utilise this technology in the best possible way. The worrying thing, it was a question you asked Gurinder, and I don't think she touched on it, which is, how do those models get trained? What are they getting trained on? That's a very different thing, because if they're being trained on copyrighted work, then they can generate something in the likeness of Train Spotting without the permission of the people who created Train Spotting, and that includes the writers, directors, actors and producers. That's a major problem, and especially if that work then goes on to generate value for the person who used the technology, but there's no compensation to the original creators, then that is a road to ruin. That has to be sorted out, and I know government's consulting on this right now, but we have to deal with that, because that is very worrying. And even now, if Gurinder's pal wrote up, can you write me a new Bend It Like Beckham? Yep. He just put into that language model sort of copyright ideas, which the language model is now going to use to generate something else for someone else. So it's complex, and I think that for us, that's the more worrying aspect of AI.
But it's already happening, surely. If you're pitching,
yeah, but I think that's where Parliament and governments around the world are trying to work out how was this done? Was it legitimate? Were permissions asked? Was compensation offered? There are closed language models which have generated their own, if you want, data set, which hasn't, just scraped off the internet to generate something. That's a different thing. That seems to me a perfectly legitimate commercial risk activity for those people, whether there's a utility or value in that. The other ones where they've used effectively the internet, which was all of our works, to generate value for them, I think is another question.
It is. It's a massive question. Well, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of one of the biggest challenges for parliaments and governments to manage this, because it's not just in the creative industries. It's going to be a big issue. It's going to be in everything.
Absolutely. Andy and Phil, do you think audiences are going to react well to AI? I mean, there'd be a novelty if we start seeing performances from long deceased people, or
it all depends on the film, doesn't it? Really, you look at Avatar. Obviously, they did to a massive extent, but you know, I think John's flagged it. The primary concern is around IP protection, and you know, we've got to tread very carefully there. It's not really. It's such a hard thing to get your head around where we're going to be and where we're going to go. I think if a film is a quality film and an idea is creative and new and refreshing and there's an audience for it, then it will always work. And AI can't do that yet. It might be able to. I mean, I'm in a sector where you hope AI might be able to reduce costs, maybe classification with the sensors or something, but there's not a lot else. I've looked at various models where they say we can read a script for you and evaluate it, but it can't really. It can't put a number on a film or say you should release it here or there.
And the vast majority, well, I would say to the nth degree of the people who run the UK cinemas take great pride in the fact that the film that they put in front of the audience, someone has chosen, essentially. You know, so while the big operators may have 1,000 screens and they may be kind of assisted by AI, there is always a human element to it. And I think, you know, having said what I said about not being in a fight with streaming, no one in a UK cinema is watching a film which is being picked by an algorithm. To be honest, they're watching a film which has been picked by, and we can probably name them between us, by individuals who on a Monday will look at the list of films, who will look at what is available and what they played and what they might move on and what they might move down, etc. And I think, you know, it's probably a potentially tricky road on our side of the house, particularly for people to start feel that they're being served something which is the result of a computer rather than a human being. That's the USP, to be perfectly honest, of cinema. It's a human experience.
And do you think other opportunities afforded by AI, sort of dubbing, more realistic dubbing of foreign language films? And how are we looking at sort of exports of our films to other countries using AI? Is that sort of something that is being considered?
More John science.
Yeah, I mean, my members in TV distribution are already using AI for making dubbing and delivery of foreign language product much more efficient. That's all under permission, it's all agreed. The performers in those programs and other people who are due royalties will get paid for the sale. If it's a cheaper way to deliver and it maximises the profit that is then distributed to all the participants, that's a good thing. So that's what I mean. It's a nuanced discussion, and when the strike was on, we were getting calls from British actors who weren't affected from their agents going, well, you can get a contract, but they can't say anything, you can't use AI. And we were like, what are you talking about? We already do. AI is used in the whole process, and so that's why it's got to be nuanced. And I think there's a lot of responsibility on us as an industry to educate people about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and understanding it. And we're working on that for our members. And as I say, we're having discussions with all the guilds and unions about that as well.
And distributors and people, are people looking for that additional export capacity for UK industry? Is that a sort of potential growth as people? I think you connect much better with a film if it doesn't look really clunky. If it's
absolutely. I mean, cinema will always remain the sort of blue ribbon viewing experience. It's almost like Phil's primed me to say this, and I think you can't be watching a film in a room full of complete strangers in the darkness. But whether they pick up on I think there's something missing with AI at present, and it may change. But you'll always need human stories, and I think one of the things that did come out of our survey work during lockdown and beyond is that cinema was seen as the nation's number one most missed activity, and firmly got a place in the nation's heart. So clearly, people enjoy that cultural mess of all going, and somebody being really annoying sitting next to you. So if you go down the AI route, you're going to miss that. Yeah, I'm not talking about this too. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Anything to add?
No. I think most of the challenges around AI, both the opportunities and the challenges, rest on the production side. Yeah. To be honest, and we're seeing them played out in real time. I think in a number of respects.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Julie.
Phil, you've already spoken about some of the problems coming back after COVID of the cinema sector, but can you comment on whether you think last summer's Barbenheimer effect was enough to turn the fortunes of the exhibition sector around?
The short answer is no. I mean, clearly it was hugely welcome, and it was almost a kind of cultural moment which reminded people about the uniqueness of the experience. No, and you can guarantee that in rooms across the UK and globally at the moment, people are trying to engineer a similar moment, and I think it was an organic thing. And one of the most interesting things, particularly around Barbie, I think, was while colleagues at Warner Brothers Discovery did a brilliant job in marketing the film, the vast majority of the marketing was done by the public. It was user-generated memes and social media, etc., etc. And I think, while colleagues at Universal who had Oppenheimer and colleagues at Warner Brothers who had Barbie, would not have in any way worked in concert to do that. The juxtaposition of those two films was almost unique, I think. Very few people can think of anything like it. No. But the reality is, Barbie made north of £90 million in the UK. Oppenheimer made around 60. That was really obviously welcome, not least because some films had already started to move. I mean, the Oppenheimer premiere happened on the day the strikes were called, so the cast had to exit stage left quite quickly. But to go back to my earlier point, most years have those big films. It's by and large the other films which oil the wheels, both in terms of income, but also in terms of the frequency and getting in a broader audience. So hugely welcome, and it's one of the things, the 4 of the 10 biggest films in unadjusted box office in the UK ever have been released post-COVID. And it's one of the things that gives us absolute confidence that when the films are there, people will return. The question is around, again, that supply, obviously people's disposable income and their ability and willingness to spend. But for we represent to the nth degree cinemas which are fixed buildings. We have 1 or 2 mobile cinemas. Drive-in cinemas came and went in a moment in COVID. But running a fixed building at the moment with energy costs and other utility costs and issues around staffing and staff and retention is a very, very challenging thing. And so it's helped, but I wouldn't say we need many more Barbies and Oppenheimers, but we need a much broader range of successful films.
So if we look at some of the smaller cinemas around the country, they are, they were helped massively by the Cultural Recovery Fund, but they are on the brink, a lot of them, financially in a really, really difficult position. And they often take more independent films. What needs to happen to secure their future?
So we would strongly push. What we saw during COVID, obviously, were a range of kind of generic business support measures like the furlough scheme and business rates reduction, etc., etc. We would strongly push on a short-term basis for the reintroduction of relief on VAT on cinema tickets. We almost with COVID to one side, we are, I'm also involved in the European Trade Body, which covers 39 European territories, and 26 of those territories have lower rates of VAT on cinema tickets, 26 out of 38. We've never adopted that approach other than under distress in COVID, but undoubtedly it allowed more money to be kept by the cinemas, but actually that reduction in the cinema ticket price was also a clear signal to customers that we continue to offer value to money. Last year, the average ticket price was just under £8. It only went up 3% from 2022. And I know from the energy and staffing costs that a large number of cinema operators felt they had to absorb that. They didn't think it was appropriate to pass that on to customers. I don't know how long that can persist. So some recognition of that in terms of, in the short term, a reduction in VAT on cinema tickets would help all of our members immensely. I think. Quite aside from the supply issues and some of the other issues, I think we probably expect some of the cost of living challenges for the public and certainly some of the cost issues for cinemas to if not disappear entirely, to kind of abate slightly. But and there is, for reasons I've said, absolute confidence in the future of the industry. But we need to find a way of getting from where we are now to where we need to be without losing sights. To be perfectly honest.
To everyone, access to cinemas is crucially important. We've seen a number of cinemas go in recent times. Have we got the right geographic spread of access to cinemas so that communities aren't left behind? And that's to everybody, whoever wants to take it first.
Shall I kick off?
I think you'll be better informed than me.
I mean, what we were seeing pre-COVID was, there are around about 850 cinemas in the UK, and as you would imagine, the major operators are primarily in the big cities and towns, and then in some of the big cities there's a more mixed economy, and then outside of the big cities and towns there tend to be kind of smaller operators who have to be all things to all people, to be perfectly honest. But what we were seeing pre-COVID was on average between 20 and 25 new sites opening. And I'm talking about myself and Andy here, our bit of the sector went through a massive technological change in the early 2010s to digital technology. And that had a whole range of benefits, but one of the benefits was it made it more economic to run a cinema in what previously would have been a challenging location, because you'd be much more flexible in terms of your programming, and a whole range of build costs were reduced, essentially. So what we were seeing was cinemas being built in areas where either there hadn't been a cinema for a long time, or cinemas being opened in areas where there was an existing cinema offer, but this new cinema added to that by being a boutique cinema or being an art house cinema, etc., etc. I think if I look at other European territories, we're actually pretty good, I think, in terms of having cinemas where people are. And we've moved away from the 1980s periods of cinemas being out-of-town retail centres that no one could get to, or certainly people struggled to get to. There's obviously more that can be done, but again, without being falsely optimistic, you will know Empire Cinemas kind of went into administration earlier in the year. They sold half of their cinemas to other operator to another operator. But I'm confident, and some of these things will become apparent, that all of the closed cinemas will be picked up by other operators. There absolutely is an opportunity, and there absolutely is an appetite amongst the public to continue to go to the cinema. But there have been some, what you might broadly call environmental factors, which have caused some cinemas kind of financial distress. But to answer your question, I think what you will see, and what we're already seeing, is that supply chain of cinemas, new cinemas coming back. And they will increasingly be responding to areas where either the cinema offer needs burgeoning or there needs to be a cinema offer. And we're also seeing, sorry to extend this conversation, we're also seeing a significant number of communities come together and demanding sometimes from the local authorities cinema, but actually coming together and building community cinemas. And that's a small but growing part of our membership as well.
Does anybody else want to comment?
No, I just think, given that, films made here or films made from here are supported by the British taxpayer, that's everyone, then I think everyone should have a chance to see movies in a local cinema. So I think that's really important. I think it's sad when films can't get seen by the British public, given that they've invested in them.
I was just going to say, I think it was a really healthy sector pre-COVID. There are signs going forward. There are companies like Everyman expanding still at a rate of knots. But for Sunderland, with 170,000 people, not to have a cinema is
just short of 300,000 actually.
Way off.
Bigger than some countries.
We're an equal size to Newcastle.
Yeah. My parents grew up in Newcastle, so they would never talk about cinema.
Done it now.
I know. I have to wash my face. But you will get a cinema back.
Yeah.
No, I know.
And you know that.
Moving on, because we're going way over where we should have been in time. John, how effective have previous efforts by the BFI and other recipients of public money been at remedying the skills shortages there are?
Well, I think they've done what they can with the money that's available. I think we need, and I'm vice chair of an industry skills task force, which has delivered a report to government and the BFI and the industry about what
the screen sector skill task force.
Yeah.
What's going to be different about that?
I think what's really different about that is it includes everyone on that task force. So that was all the US majors, all the US streamers, all the British broadcasters, all the agencies, screen agencies, and it came up with a very clear medium-term strategy, and that involves increasing investment. But critically, it involves actually us getting a lot better in analysing what do we need, when will we need it, how do we know it's worked. So I think there's been a lot of investment made, but I don't think we've been as good as working out, was it in the right place? Did it deliver what we wanted? Was it sustained enough? Was it in the right skills that we wanted to look at? And I think we have a huge opportunity as a collective industry to actually put that together in a way which gives us that longer term strategic planning and investment. All the major employers and investors who come to the UK, when we talked about this, didn't balk at the idea of putting more money in. What they said was, where's it going and what's it doing? Do I know it's been sensibly invested? So I think we've done well up to now, but I think we're at this moment where we can do much better.
Okay. And Phil and Andy, are the needs of exhibition and distribution sectors adequately represented in the cross-sector skills initiatives that are going on?
Well, we're the smallest sector out of the three of us. We've only got 200 to 300 people. The FDA actually offers a year-round training program, all levels of the business, free to all of our distributor members. We've got an intern scheme where we take on people and they have 10-month placements with member companies, all paid for by us as well. And that's got a 95% success rate. And we tend to not get people from traditional university routes if we can. We tend to be quite diverse in who we get in terms of new blood. I think back to when I started, one company out of 50 replied to me and said, if you want to work for free, then come on in. So you've just got to get in. Thankfully, it's a lot better than we pay people these days, and it's a lot less abusive. But ours, we're less of an issue. It's probably more on the production side. An exhibition, it's more retail stuff without insulting you.
We're a slightly odd fit under these, and this is not a criticism, it's just a statement, that we're a slightly odd fit under this umbrella because most of the skills that are required for people to work in cinemas are kind of leisure and hospitality skills. You know, at the top of the tree there are film-related skills, but actually by number the vast majority of people who work in UK cinemas, they probably have an aptitude and set of skills which are part of the hospitality and leisure sector. I think if this kind of segues into it from skills, there are a whole range of staff recruitment and retention issues on our side, which will be very familiar to you from what you've heard from retail and hospitality and leisure, etc. But on the skills side, I think for the most part, while we absolutely support all the work that's done on production and distribution, most of the work we do is kind of in-house because we're slightly old. We sit slightly one side of the kind of skill set which is required to work within the industry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Last but not least, Rupa.
Yeah, thanks, chaps. And my questions actually follow on from the skills stuff that you were talking about. I just wondered, so I'm kind of talking about retention and recruitment of people across all different backgrounds. Why do you think there's such slow progress being made in improving diversity behind the camera? I mean, those figures I was quoting in that last panel, apparently 1.4% of directors and 3% of production staff are BAME, and only 22% of top roles in the industry are women.
Is that in film?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I think that shows that's why we need to have more sustained careers opportunities. We need to make sure that there's employment for people. There's there is still in film, not so much I would say in domestic television, but because also Diamond data shows that it's much bigger numbers there. In film, we don't have good data. There's some data, but also I think that the ability to have sustainable careers which retain you in the industry so you can become senior, like Gurinder, and you can affect change is really hard, and that's a big problem, and not just in film and TV, but generally across the creative industries. Retaining diverse talent at senior levels who change what that industry, how it works, and who they recruit and how they think is a big problem across all of the creative industries.
On our side of the fence, actually, the diversity profile of the industry at the kind of shop floor is I think slightly overrepresented in terms of the UK population.
Is it a pyramid thing where at the junior thing and then in the boardroom?
Exactly that, and that is the issue. That is absolutely the issue for our sector. And we've worked to establish a cinema apprenticeship, because I think quite often people coming in at that level didn't necessarily see a route through, as it were. But I wouldn't pretend that the picture at the higher levels of the industry on my side is necessarily a good one, and it's something which we continue to be in dialogue with, particularly around our larger operators. Essentially, there certainly is a better, as it were, diversity profile amongst kind of general and regional managers now. I've been in the job for 17 years than there was then, but there's still a long way to go, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're trying to get there in terms of the FDA and distribution. We have 4, I don't want to use the word Bollywood because it seems so catch-all, but we have 4 Indian distributors in our mix. We have a distributor who releases Chinese films. We have a female-only member company. Try to make a difference, but it's small steps. I'm also quite conscious that we're 3 white middle-aged men sat here on this panel, which is not
me.
late middle-aged in some cases.
I know, but
I think the phrase is male, pale, and stale, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're all trying, I think, and yeah, John's primarily in this sort of area with his skills work. But
do you think, Phil? I think you're an ex-civil servant. That government could incentivise industry to use more robust, formal, transparent recruitment procedures, because often in some of these industries it's a bit informal, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and if you're a bit connected to someone you can get work experience and a foot on the ladder. Should
yes
there be
is the answer.
targets?
I think yes is the answer, to be perfectly honest. I think there's always more that government can do, and there's always more that individual companies can do. I mean, certainly the people I represent have tried to be more transparent in terms of their recruitment process, try to be more open in terms of their recruitment process, and to draw from a much broader pool of people, and although it's not a kind of badge of honour, the kind of practices that Andy was talking about kind of unpaid internships and those kind of things are definitely no longer kind of prevalent. But there is always more that can be done, and anything that government might want to do positively to incentivise those approaches, I think, is a conversation well worth having.
And John, you talked about freelancers. Do you think that this whole sort of model and ecosystem means that people can get out of those formal procedures, or even investing in skills and well-being, because they're not like a salaried person where you have to do the training course? So the freelance, a bit more drop in, drop out.
Well, we have a number of funds that have been set up, which are effectively levies on production, which goes into training, and that all of that funding is generally targeted at freelancers. So the industry invests quite substantially already across the piece in maintaining our workforce, and the workforce is predominantly freelance. So that's why employers put up that money, and why we put it into funds, which is then distributed to help freelancers, both new entrants but critically senior level progression, develop the skills and experiences so they can progress in their careers. That's absolutely fundamental to our competitiveness as an audiovisual economy.
I think, Phil, you helped draw up the COVID safety net, some of that stuff.
Yes.
I mean, we all get, as constituency MPs, emails from people. There are 3 million people who got not a penny out of all the different COVID schemes. And we've heard that in the strikes, there's people that have ceased employment in that sector. It's hit a lot of people very hard. What can we do about all this? To have a more sustainable model, that it's not so hand-to-mouth, that it's so precarious and subjective.
So I think that I would put my hand up here and say that as a sector we did well by standing by our by the employees within the sector. Clearly the furlough scheme was kind of a godsend to a whole range of sectors. But in that we're in a much more an even more competitive market now for staff, and particularly young people are very savvy about who they go to work for. To be perfectly honest, their expectations in terms of the care broadly defined that an employer might provide, and the progression, etc. So for those people who are currently part of the exhibition workforce, I think it is a materially different experience, and they will find a materially different attitude from their employers than may have been the case 20 or 30 years ago. If we're talking about on the customer side, then clearly, going back to that initial point of cinemas wanting to get as many people across the door as possible, then we have a very, very dynamic range of pricing. But I'm not quite clear which side of the fence you were aiming that question at, around the way that employees are treated or how we bring along the broadest possible range of the public into the cinema-going experience.
I'm just thinking of the workforce. Having a diverse workforce is good, but if it's a precarious freelance thing, people won't want to go there unless they've got some safety net or cushion from bank and mum and dad.
So that means my first answer applies essentially. I mean, I think, cinemas increasingly, in terms of wages and reward, in terms of incentives, in terms of, I'll use the word care again, etc., and in terms of progression, have needed, quite rightly, to up their game, to be perfectly honest. As have a whole range of employers, it's not a cinema-specific thing. And so I think that, someone on the outside looking in, whether young or otherwise, will actually see a much more appreciative sector and see a sector actually which takes care of its workforce and will see it as a career rather than just something where, a summer job or a short-term job, etc.
That's largely it. I've gone from 0 cinemas in my constituency to 4 recently.
4, haven't you? Yes,
and only one is one of the chains that you mentioned as 75%. So the view on the A40 at Park Royal, you might know, driving up and down there, that's now an Odeon Lux.
Right.
But the others, they're 2 genuinely independent ones.
The Ealing Project, haven't you?
Yep, and also Act 1, which is an ex-Passmore Edwards library that some locals did. And then the last one is, most recent one, Picture House. 8 screens. I just don't know if there's space for all of them.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's
what can you do?
Talking out loud.
That's a good problem to have.
Riches. Very good, Rupert. Thank you very much. Can I thank all of you for your time today? If you think of anything else that you feel that we need to take on board as part of our inquiry, can you please get in touch with us after the meeting? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Order. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.